Stop paying for event software. So in the next few minutes, I'll show you how to build a reusable e-invite workflow that you can spin up for any event. So you're probably familiar with something like this, einvite.com, where you can send digital invitations for events such as weddings, parties, birthdays, and so on and so forth. So we will use Veer0 for the RSVP site, Ottokit for the automation, and then we're using Google Sheet for tracking to keep things simple. We're also going to be using Robolly for dynamic invite image template. And then also we're going to be using ChatGPT to generate the base image, which we're going to be using for the invites. So I'll demo the full RSVP flow first, and then I'll teach you the exact steps. So let's go ahead and build it. All right, so before we start our automation, I just want to give you a quick overview of the diagram first so you can see like the big picture and what we're trying to achieve here. So first things first, we're going to be storing all the data inside of Google Sheet, which we're going to be using to keep track of who we sent the invitation to, and also if how many guests is that person going to be including as part of the RSVP, and also where they're going to be coming to that event. So that's going to be the first thing. The next thing we're going to be building is the UI itself. We're going to start off with V0 and Robolly. So Robolly, if you're not familiar with, is a basically like image generation where it allows you to reuse a certain image and you can just plug in dynamic data, kind of similar to Canva, but I've had this for a very long time now and want to use it for this demo. So we're going to be using that for the image, where we're going to be plugging in the name of the person we're going to be throwing party for, and it's going to be generating an image that we're going to be using in the V0 site. We're also going to be using that as part of the email, so you can kind of see how it ties in together once we get there. And then the V0 itself, we're going to be generating a simple e-invite type of site where we'll have a link to the V0 site that we're going to be sending to the recipient when we send the invitation via email. And then also lastly, we're going to be using Ottokit for automation. So we're going to be doing two workflows. One is to send invitation. The invitations are going to be coming from Google Sheets. So we're going to be looping through all the different recipients from that Google Sheet in our contacts. And then that's how we can figure out whether we already sent that message to our users. And then the next one is the webhook. So we're going to be using Ottokit again to capture the webhook. So the UI is going to be tied to the webhook. It's going to be performing a post request to that endpoint. And then from there, we can capture the recipient's response of whether they're going to be RSVPing to that event and how many guests are they going to be bringing in the event. So that's going to be, this is going to be the diagram for what we're going to be working on today, just to give you a clear idea of what we're trying to build today. So let's go ahead and start this demo by showing the Robolly side first. Robolly is just an app that allows you to build out your templates, and then you can just plug in, kind of like similar to Canva, where you have this default template for the image, and then you can just plug in your data and you can just change any dynamic data that you want on that template so that you can reuse the same template over and over again. So you can use it for social media. In our case, we're going to be using it for our event, for the template that we're going to be sending as part of the e-site that we're going to be building today. All right, so the first thing is we're going to be logging into Robolly here. I usually like to go into the template gallery here, where we can see all the different types of templates, so we don't have to worry about having to start and build a template from the scratch. So I went with something like a vertical type of format that we can use. You can filter which template or a type of layout you want to use for your template. So I went with something like vertical. So there's like a few templates here that you can choose from, depending on what type of events or what look are you going for your event. So there's one right here for the wedding. So I went with something like this, where it's like a decent wedding invitation. So this is what it looks like. As far as the image in the middle, I just change it to fit my needs. So don't worry about the specifics of this template, as you can change a lot of these, but just giving you a concept here of what you can do with something like this. So from here, you can edit it. You can edit the parameters such as the date. If you don't have to make it dynamic. If you want to, you can just make it and keep it static if you want. But there's a few things that you can probably change, such as the address here. You can specify the address. You can change the date here. So if you want to reuse this for other types of events, you can change the date, such as the day of the week, where you can specify. You can change it to Saturday if you want to, or whatever. And also you can change the alignment and so on and so forth. So you can do a lot of editing here and customization for this. You can change the address and also the background. So the most important thing here is the background where you can change. So you can just click on it, and you can see that the dimension for this image is 360 by 360. The way I generate this image is using ChatGPT. I went to ChatGPT and I prompted it to generate a 360 image for a birthday party card background. Since we're going to be using this as part of the background, we don't want to make this like super in your face. So it is for a Demon Slayer team. This is the output that it generated. I just went ahead and downloaded and then uploaded as part of the template. So it fits the template perfectly. And then I just kind of move things around. So this Jacob right here could be for any person really. I just set it as Jacob as the default name for this placeholder right here. Once you're satisfied with the whole template design, we can just go ahead and switch from edit here to render. And then this is going to give you a few more options that you can choose from, such as what type of rendering. Once you copy that URL into your browser, what output is going to be generating. So I choose JPEG here, and then the scaling, I'm just going to leave it at default at 559 by 794. I'm fine with some of these defaults here, such as Jacob, but we can change this dynamically if you want to. And then at the bottom here, you can see that with the placeholder, you can see that you just have to make this gives you this URL right here, where you can just pass in the names and then the title, the place, and so on and so forth. And then with the modifications, meaning that it contains the default data or parameters that we have on this one, we're just going to go ahead and copy this render link. So that's pretty much the finished product as far as the Robolly site. We're going to be switching over to V0 to generate the actual website where the user are going to be RSVPing for our event. So the next step in our list is we're going to be jumping into V0. I could have used Windsurf or Cursor for that matter, but I think V0 just makes it easy to just generate like a mock website and have it published in just like an instant. So I just went and opted for this route because it's just so much easier. So for the prompt that I used for V0, I just went with this prompt right here. It says, build a simple but modern language page for an e-invite where the page will contain a large image. So just kind of went with something like this where you can see the whole image for the event right in the middle, where we're going to be using the Robolly here for this one right here. And then there's going to be a button at the bottom where they can accept or decline the event if they're not planning on going to or they're planning on attending. And there's also a separate element where they can choose additional guests. So if they're planning on going and accepting the invitation, they can add and include additional guests as part of it. So I specify here that it's going to be making a post request to a webhook, right? So that webhook is going to be coming later on, but I just went and go ahead and just ask for this ahead of time so it knows that where we're going with this type of website. So the button will send a post request to a webhook, whether the user can make it or not. So I specified that we're going to be sending a true or false, and then we're also going to be including an option where they can include additional guests. So I specified the property here specifically so that when we accept the response from a webhook, we can see these properties here. These are the properties that we're expecting. So the landing page will include a parser that will parse the route for the email. So every event URL that we're going to be sending to a recipient, we're going to be passing in the email as part of that link so we can determine who that user is, who accepted that invitation. So that's how we can identify that person. And then the email will be sent as part of the body when sending to the payload. And then the email is going to be parsed and sent to the route. So once the user submits the form, it will let them know via a modal that the submission has been successful. So it's a very simple website that we're going to be generating here in V0. So this is the output that it generated after a few back and forth. This is the actual output for this, and I also published it. So once it's published, and it looks like this. So you can see here that the Robolly image has been generated in the middle of the page, along with the dynamic data that we passed in. And then also, since I passed in the email, so you can see here that part of the URL has this email query string as part of it. So it has my email on it. This will identify me as the person who received that invitation. So I can respond to this email. You can see that the email is being parsed and then it's being inserted as part of the website here. And then from here, I can just decline or accept the invitation. And if I want to include additional guests, I can just increase this or decrease this. So simple. And then once we accept this or decline it, it's going to make a simple request to another webhook, which we're going to be building later on. So this is part of the V0 part of the workflow here. So the next thing I want to show you guys is the database itself, where we're going to be keeping track of the invitations that we have. So the first column here is for the email. We're going to be listing out who we're going to be sending the email to for the invitation, and then the name of the recipient, and also whether they accepted it or not. So I just made it accepted. And then if they're including additional guests, I also want to include it. So I added a guest column here. And this is the flag that we're going to be using so we can keep track of whether we have sent the invitation to this user already. So we're going to be using this later on when we build the first workflow as part of automation. So this is very simple database here or spreadsheet that we're going to be using for this automation. We're only going to be using 5 different fields. I obviously can go get a little bit more sophisticated and add more columns to this, but this is what we're going to be using today. So we're just going to go ahead and just go to the next step, which is build the first workflow and send the email invitations. All right, so let's go ahead and build the first workflow, which is to send the email to recipients from our Google Sheets. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and forth between the spreadsheet here and the workflow here. But let me go ahead and just kind of show you top to bottom what the workflow for this first automation is going to do. So for this one, I just went with a schedule here where I schedule it every day at 12 a.m. or I can just have it set to something like 7 a.m. so that everyone's awake and so on. So let's go ahead and do a fetch data here and hit save. So that's going to be the first thing is I set it to schedule so that I can go to the spreadsheet once a day and then send the invitation that way. So it's more efficient. The next part here is I want to do a loop and just go to all the recipients in my spreadsheet here. As you can see here, there's like 5 different columns here. The first one is the email, and then the name, accepted, and the guest, and whether we sent that invitation already. So we're going to be pulling that information into our automation here. But the way the loop works inside of Ottokit is different than if you're used to NAN or Active Pieces and other automation tools. This loop right here that they have accepts a string, a comma separated values, and then that's going to be part of the actual items that we're going to be pulling in as part of the loop. For that, the best way to do that is to create 3 different Google Sheets calls to fetch the range values. And for this, we're just going to go ahead and fetch the first one, which is the first column, which is the email here. So we're going to be fetching the email as an array. And you see here that the emails are both being fetched if we pass in. Let me go ahead and do cancel here and do a refresh. All right, let me go ahead and click on this again. So once you add a Google Sheets node here, you can see here that you can specify the worksheet, and also you can specify the spreadsheet that you want to link into this automation. And then we're going to be passing in the range. So the range is the set of values that we want to pull in here. So we're going to be pulling in the A2 to A100 so we can skip the header from this. So we're going to be pulling it from A2 down to A100. So we're just going to go down to that list. So we're going to be going on the same theme here. And so after we pull that, we're going to go ahead and continue. And then once we do a test here, you can see that it pulls both the values into an array of strings. So we're going to go ahead and hit save. And then the next one would be, you see here that E2 to E50, which corresponds to whether we sent that invitation or not. So we're just going to be pulling the records within that sent. We also want to make sure that if we're using this type of workflow, we want to make sure that all the columns here are pre-filled with values. We don't want empty values here, as it's going to throw off the empty string type of separate values here. So that's going to be the next one is we're going to be pulling in the sent column. And then the next one is we're going to be pulling in the B2 into B50, which is the name of that person that we're going to be sending an invitation to. So we're going to be plugging it as far as the email so that we can personalize that email when we send that invitation to that user. All right, so once we get that inside of this, we're going to be including that inside of this loop. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a plus here so you can see how it works. So I'm going to do a loop here. not human, but loop. And then inside of the loop, we're going to do a start loop, right? And then from here, we can do a map. So we can map each individual columns that we want to include as part of that loop. For this one, for instance, we want to include the name first, right? So we're going to do an @ symbol here. And then from here, we're going to be looking for the name. So we're going to be getting the values from this column right here. And then if you want to include additional items, we can just go ahead and map it again. For this second one, we want to map in the email. So we're going to do @ here. And then we're going to just be looking for the email and then grab the value. So we want to proceed that and to also get whether we sent that email or not. So we're going to do an @ here. And then whether we send or not, it's going to be in this particular one. It's a bit different compared to an or different automation tool, but this is how I figured out how the loop works in Ottokit. So once we continue and do test action, you can see here that for each individual row in that spreadsheet, we're getting the value of name and the email, whether we sent it or not, and also the iteration, which is like iteration 1, first and then second, and then third, and so on and so forth. So if you have 50, you're going to get like an iteration up to 50, right? And then, yeah, so we're just going to go ahead and hit save once you get that. So that's how easy it is to add a loop into your workflow. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that since that's an extra step that we want. The next thing that we want to do is we want to determine whether we send that email or not. So we're just going to go ahead and just loop through all the contacts in the rows in our spreadsheet. And then we're going to be checking if we sent that email already or not. So if it's true, we're just going to go ahead and skip it. So we're going to do a operator. If not, it's not equal to true. So we're going to be setting the condition to sent here. So we're going to do an @ here. And we want to make sure that when you select a value, it has to be within the loop, right? So we want to select the sent here, since that's where we're checking the equality to in the operator. And then we're going to be testing where the value is true here. So if you go back to the Google Sheet here, for some reason, the Google Sheet sets the value as true or false in capital letters. So we want to make sure that we want to be specific that we want to check for capitalized. You can add additional conditions if you want to be more, if you want to just make sure that it's not equal to true. So if you're checking for lowercase or uppercase, you can go with that route as well. So if either of these passes, then it's going to go and go ahead and send the email invitation. So let's go ahead and do condition here. And this is going to be true, which means that we're going to be sending an email to this recipient, right? Since it's false. And then for the Gmail part, so I'm going to show you how the Gmail works first. So usually you're going to be setting the to value who's going to be sending the email to. So for this one, we're also going to be going through and adding it as part of this loop, right? So we're going to be choosing the email from this. And then this is going to be static because it's going to be coming from me. And then this is also going to be static since it's also coming from me. You can make the subject dynamic if you want to, but I can just keep it static for this particular one. So we have to select the inbox and then the body. So for the body, instead of just typing in some random, it's just basic text, we just went ahead and went with a template here. So you can see here, have the name concatenated as part of the template here when you send the invitation to that recipient. All right, so instead of using a regular text here inside of the body, so for instance, I don't have this text right here. So if I do, you see here that I have a template here. We can see the image here coming from Robolly as well with the word "you're invited" and then "hi" and then the recipient. And also you can see here that just click here to RSVP. So these are all like dynamically inserted as part of this body. So you're gonna have an image here, which I'm gonna be showing you guys in a second how to build this. Instead of a regular text here, I included a email template that we can dynamically insert data that's coming from within the loop itself, so that each individual recipient will get a personalized email with a unique URL that we'll be using the V0 site for. So I'm going to show you guys how to build this dynamic template here from Ottokit. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to a different tab here. So if you go back into the dashboard in Ottokit, you can switch into the email template. So there's like a workflows here and then MCPs. If you go all the way to the bottom, you can see that there's an email template section here. And then you can see here that I have two templates that we can use for the emails. So went ahead and just built this birthday template here where you can see here. So it says, hey, and then the name of the recipient. So I just went ahead and just built everything from scratch since they don't have a pre-made template yet that's available. So you can see that there's a desktop and then there's a mobile preview of what the email is going to look like. So inside of this, I just added an image here where the content is coming from Robolly here with the pre-filled information that we have. And then at the bottom, I have a click here to RSVP, which is like just a regular button that they can click on so that they can go to the URL of that event. So everything else is the same. You can see here that there's a placeholder on the top where it says, hey, and then the name of the recipient, which we can substitute the name later on when we go through each of the item in the loop. So that's how you can build a simple template here. It comes with a template root, and there's like a bunch of different things here that you can do, different layouts, different content types, and then there's like different elements here. If you want to include like phone number, you can include a video, a header, a text, image. So this is like a brand new feature that Ottokit just added into their part of the workflow here. So I'm pretty sure that these elements and content and layouts are all going to grow and expand in the future. So we're just going to go ahead and just take advantage of what we see now. But for now, we use the image and also the static basic text. So once we have everything in place, however we want the email to look like, it's not the fanciest email in the world, but here's what it looks like. So if you open up the email, you can see here that Joe, I removed the hey here, but you can see here that Joe is being substituted here since this recipient is Joe. And then here is the click to RSVP. When you click on this link, it's going to take you to this URL where it has the email for that specific recipient. So it has the email query string on the top, as you can see here. And then the invitation is for this email address. And then from here, we can respond to this. We can say, I want to, or I decline this invitation. So let's accept it. And then once we accept it, it should give you as a modal that we can see here, it's been confirmed. And then if we go back into the invitation here, you can see that the invitation for this particular recipient has been accepted, and then with a guest of 2. So if they decide to change that later on, add additional guests, then they can also update our database here. So that's the simple explanation how that works as far as email templates. All right, so going back to our email here inside of Gmail. So that's how a template works. Basically, we're going to be substituting anything that's wrapped around the double curly braces. We can substitute this with anything that we want to. So in our case, we're substituting this top right here where it says hi, and then the name with the name of the recipient. And then at the bottom right here, we can see here that we're also swapping it out and we're passing in the email and then equals into the action, the email within the loop, within this for loop here. So once we do that, we can hit continue and then hit save, and then we can test the action and so on. So that's out of the way. The next thing that we need to do is after we send the email, we want to make sure that we want to update the Google Sheet so that we can set the sent status or column into true. In the beginning, by default, it's going to be set to false since we haven't sent the email yet. Once we send an email, it's going to be set to true. So this is the part that's where that happens. So we're just going to go ahead and do a capital true here. As far as row number, we want to be able to figure out which row number we want to update, right? If, for instance, the email is at this row right here, we want to update the row number 3. So how we're going to do that is if you go back into the loop here. So you can see once we do a test on the top, you can see that every time we do a loop, we see this iteration here. So 1 and then 2. So iteration 1, iteration 2. So instead of updating the first one, which is incorrect, since that's the header, we want to increment it by 1, right? So if we go for the first row here, right, we're updating the 2, not the 1, right? So what we want to do is we want to add a formatter here, and we want to choose the math operations. So we're going to be doing a operation of add, and we're going to be choosing the values. So if we go here and do an add here, we're going to be using the loop, and then inside of this is the iteration. So 1, 2, and so on and so forth. So we're just going to go ahead and do a increment of 1 for each one, right? So once we do that, when we do a 1 plus 1, then we're going to get a 2. And then the second one, it's gonna be the third one, and so on and so forth. So once we hit save, we can go ahead and pass the value that we get from that formatter into this row number here. So for this one, we want to update the second row, and then we're just gonna go ahead and leave all the different columns as is, and we're just gonna go ahead and update the sent status or column here. So that's pretty much the first workflow that we are going to be building. So this is probably the longest one. So we're just going to go ahead and jump into the third one, right? So if you go back into V0 here, so every time we do make a post request, and where the recipient accepts or declines an invitation, that's usually sending that request into the webhook, right? Which we're receiving in Ottokit. So if you go back in the code here, I'm not going to bore you with the different codes here, but essentially I have to create an API route. Since we're making a request to a different site, a different URL, we have to pass it through the API. So this is just a way to circumvent the CORS issue that you might encounter if you're doing a webhook request to a different URL. So you have a page right here, which is like the invitation, and then you have this invite RSV component, which pretty much does the heavy lifting here. And then in the middle of that page, you can see that the Robolly image here is being rendered. And then it's going to show here, it's going to make a post. So if you follow the thing here, it's making a post, a fetch into this URL, which is the API route within the same domain. And we're going to be passing in the email, accept, and additional guests. So all that information is going to be passed into our API. And our API will accept it, which goes into this route right here. It's going to do a little bit of validation, make sure that there's an email. And then the webhook URL is part of the environment variables that we're defining. So the Ottokit webhook that we're going to be creating in a minute here, that's what we're going to be setting here as part of the next public webhook URL. And then from here, we're just going to make a fetch request from the API into the webhook, passing the parameters that we're passing in as part of the event page. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and move into the last workflow inside of Ottokit to accept the payload that we're receiving from the event page. All right, so it's getting late already. So let's go ahead and wrap up the whole workflow here with the second automation here. So this is going to be accepting, we're going to be doing a webhook as a trigger here. And every time you add a webhook, it gives you this unique URL here. So we're using that and feed it into V0. So this is going to be the URL that we're going to be using in V0 to make a request and send the data, right? So once we test that, you see here that usually it's going to wait for the request to occur. And then you can see here that we can cast a response from that request. So from here, you can see that I'm sending a test of email, and then you can see here the false, additional guess is 0, and then also the timestamp, which we don't really need, but it's here, it's included as part of the request. We're just going to go ahead and just leave it as it is. So we got the data in front of us. The next thing that we need to do is we need to look up that specific row inside of Google Sheet based on that email. So you can see here that we can find the recipient based on the email column here. And going back into the workflow, if you do a find recipient action inside of Google Sheet, you can select it here. You can do a select event, and then we're going to be using the lookup spreadsheet row, right? So we're going to be using the connection that we have. If you don't know how to connect to it, you just basically create a new connection, and it's going to give you a modal where you can choose and authenticate into your Google Sheet account, right? So I'm going to use my account here, and then we're going to hit and continue. And then we're going to be using the spreadsheet. Same thing, we're going to be connecting it to the spreadsheet. We're going to be choosing out of that account which spreadsheet we're going to be using for this, where we're going to be using the birthday party invitations. There's only one worksheet here, which is the same worksheet that we've been using. And then for the lookup column, we're going to be using the email as our column. So you can switch it out into like whatever column that you have in our Google Sheet. And then value to search, we're going to be using the email. So if you do a value to search here, you can use any of these parameters that we accepted from the webhook. We're going to be using the email specifically. And if you do a continue and then test action here, you see a response from Google Sheet, which will return us back the entire row of records, right? So the only reason why we're doing a retrieval of the row record here is so we can figure out which row we need to update, right? So once we do that, we're going to go ahead and do a formatting here. And So you can see that all the responses here for the accepted are uppercase. So we're just going to go ahead and format the text to become upper text. So since we're accepting it as a true or false, we're just going to go ahead and do a formatter type of event here. And then we're going to be using the app formatter, and then we're going to be using the event of text, right? We're going to go ahead and hit continue. And then for the action, we're going to be using the uppercase. So there's like a bunch of different things that you can use against a text type of event. So we're going to go ahead and enter the text here and do at and then webhooks. And then we're just going to go ahead and do an accept here. And then if you hit continue and test action, you can see that if we accept of true or whatever we get from the payload, we're just going to go ahead and convert that to uppercase, which results into false here. And we're going to go ahead and hit save. We're just going to go ahead and hit confirm here. And then after that, we can go ahead and update the row. So the row number is coming from the row number. If you do add here, if you do find recipients, you can see that. So the reason why we have to retrieve that row first is so that we can figure out which row number we need to update. So as part of the result from Google Sheet, when we do a retrieval for that particular email, it's able to return us the row number, and then we can use that against this row number, so which is the key when you're trying to update a Google Sheet record. So, and then from here, you can just set the email address, which is coming from the webhook request, and then the name if you have to. But in this case, we're just going to go ahead and leave it as it is, since we don't really need to update the name. Whether we accepted it, so the result is going to be coming from the formatter itself, right? So we're going to use the uppercase value that we use from the formatter node, and then additional guess. This is going to be coming from the webhook. So if you do a webhook here, we're going to be just pointing it to the webhook additional guess here and hit continue. And then once you do that, that's just pretty much just going to update. You have to test the action here. And then this is going to be updating that particular row here, right? So hit save, and that's pretty much it. So now that you have a reusable zero-cost e-invite stack for any event, just clone this build, and I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something in the process. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.